Okay, seems like we are live. We are on. A very warm welcome to all of you. A good afternoon, a good evening, a good morning when you dial in from the US. My name is Thomas Progroup. I'm the head of the GPA coordination unit. GPA is a platform which is looking at achieving SDG 7, so the energy SDG, in displacement settings. And when we talk about displacement settings, we are talking about displacement settings where refugees are being hosted, where internally displaced people are hosted, so people who had to flee within the country, and also their host communities, not to forget them. So the GPA is a platform consisting of 18 members coming from the humanitarian space. And let me share screen that you can see the logos from humanitarian space and from development. And as you can see, the sort of the who's who in humanitarian activities and energy and development are part of this and steering this process. And on top, we have roughly 200, 300 additional partners in the wider network. And one of the activities we're doing in this platform is organizing advocacy events and speak about this topic and promote this topic. And so I'm very glad that we have a wonderful mix of panelists today. Let me introduce them quickly one by one. I'm going from left to right. I shouldn't start with the man, but still, Owen, welcome. Owen Graff, Assistant Director of Environment and Society Program at Chatham House, probably one of the most well-known expert and most well-known researcher on this topic of energy and displacement setting. We have Rafaela Belanca, a long-standing friend and partner at WFP, one of the key actors within the World Food Programme on energy and food linkages. We have Judith Walker, COO of African Clean Energy, one of the key probably one of the most innovative cook stove provider solutions active in displacement settings, but also beyond. And we have Yetunde Fadei, which I actually happen to know only this morning, but I'm really, really gladful that she's with us today and that she reached out to us to be part of this panel. She's executive director of RIES in Africa, and I'll allow also the panelists to introduce themselves even further if they want to. So what we are planning to do is I will immediately hand over to Owen. He will give us a very brief introduction into the topic of cooking energy in displacement settings. Then we have a panel discussion, and then we will close this in about 40 minutes. And we will see if we can also get some additional questions from the audience. We have a chat function, maybe that could work. And then, but without further ado, I would like to hand over to my speakers, and I will stop share screen that we are all on the same page. And just to ask Essie for all, is Yetunde with us? Because I don't see her yet. Hello, Essie for all colleagues.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome.
Perfect. Excellent. So then, Owen, over to you to brief us and give us a quick introduction into the topic.
Thanks, Thomas. And yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to speak about this critical subject. I guess if I were to start anywhere, it would be with the overall levels of deprivation, energy deprivation in refugee settings, and to highlight that, of course, although SDG 7 commits the world to achieving affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all by 2030, displaced people are among the most likely to miss out on this. And I guess on top of this, much like in the kind of broader energy access space, in settings of displacement, electrification has probably tended to take a higher priority and a bigger slice of the pie than clean cooking. So there's been quite a significant degree of attention and money and time and resource dedicated to thinking about kind of how to decarbonize UN bodies and thinking about, introduction of solar systems rather than big diesel gensets, which is completely necessary. But clean cooking solutions are lagging behind that bit. And I guess if I start, I'd say estimates that we made several years ago suggested that over 80% of refugees and displaced people in camps have essentially absolutely minimal access to energy and extremely high dependence on traditional biomass for cooking. There's, of course, huge variety depending on where we're talking about. But broadly, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, we're talking about huge reliance on wood and not enough of it to cook the food that people need to eat and feed themselves healthily. And I guess none of the modelling or the numbers that I've looked at in the intervening years since we did that research suggest that those top line numbers are very different. And of course, as you probably heard on the SDG 7 pavilion over the last 11 days, this has pretty terrible repercussions for health, for the environment, and for livelihoods. So on health, due to the cramped conditions that refugees are in, they're often highly dependent on cooking with little ventilation, so are exposed to very high levels of noxious particulate matter, as well as all the kind of safety issues associated with a huge reliance on open fires when shelters are made of wood and textile. And of course, also women and girls also frequently experience intimidation and sexual violence when leaving camps to collect firewood. So there's a whole bunch of health and safety issues. The environment is an issue because lacking options for cooking means that areas around refugee settlements are often increasingly deforested. Essentially, in the absence of alternatives, refugees turn to what is available around them, and that is normally firewood. And livelihoods, because although data is pretty scarce and pretty patchy, everything that we've seen shows that refugees actually spend a very high proportion of their incomes on fuel for cooking. So in Nyarugusu in Tanzania, researchers found something like a kind of 50% spending on energy out of overall income levels. Chatham House found in Burkina Faso that spending on cooking fuel made up 89% of expenditure on energy. In Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, we're talking about 55% of expenditure on energy as a proportion of energy spending. So really, all this is to say that we're not starting from a good overall position. But there are, I think, reasons for encouragement. Firstly, because there's an increasing number of people with the skills and the talent and the ambition, and I think crucially the awareness of this issue to be able to make a difference. And I'm really pleased to see that some of them are on the panel today. Secondly, because I do think there is a shift in momentum on this issue. There's more ideas emerging, there's more innovative thinking, thinking about how we can kind of leapfrog the current baseline to make a fundamental difference to all the things that I've talked about. And thirdly, because in all the work I've done with Chatham House, the majority of refugee households express very clearly, very directly, that they would like to cook on stoves that use less fuel, produce less smoke, and are better for them. So overall, I guess I would say that clean cooking investments can be and already are an attractive proposition if we think about the full economic benefits of cooking, financial, health, environment, and if they're factored into the calculation. But we do, of course, need that finance, that people, and crucially, the will to take action. So I'll leave it there, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Owen, for this comprehensive overview. I'd like to really come back to one number that you presented, 35 to 50% of monthly expenditure for energy. I mean, we see this debate now in Europe where we see a relatively big increase in petrol costs, but we also see the big news about this and how important this topic is for the people, and the energy expenditures in Europe are a fraction of what we are talking about in Africa. So imagine you have to spend 30% of your monthly income for energy. That would have been a totally different debate, right? A totally different ball game all over the place. To come back to the specific settings in displacement settings, or the specific details of displacement setting, Rafa, why is it so difficult, especially in humanitarian response? You're muted.
So sorry. I think this has a historical root. We are now glad to have SDG 7 with us, but there wasn't a millennium goal on energy. So this has been a blind spot for a long time. There isn't an energy cluster. No specific organization has a clear mandate to address energy needs. And this means that when you have an emergency, when disaster strike, the response is assessed, designed, and budgeted around those topics that are recognized and codified, like food, wash, shelters, etc. While energy comes later, almost as an afterthought. Therefore, energy advisors are not there to plan together with other experts. Data collection is not comprehensive, and also is not whatever data is available is not analyzed with an energy perspective. So I think that's a little bit responsible for the situation we find ourselves in. We think that people need food, and then magically, we do not think about how that food should be cooked. And obviously, energy is used because you do need energy to do things. It can be bad energy, it can be better energy. So if you don't have anything else, you would use firewood. And then the same with so many other energy services. One of the most important things for refugee people in camps is to keep in touch with their family and friends, because remittances is actually so very important to them. And charging a phone becomes vital, but it's not really one topic that is assessed by us, unfortunately. Or, yeah, historically, we are doing better, I think.
Well, part of this meeting today is that we make it better and that we talk about this. And one of our key messages also to the donor community and to the wider stakeholders that are engaged in humanitarian activities is, if you provide food, make sure you also provide the energy to cook the food, as you say, Rafa. And I also want to come back to your other point, energy as an afterthought, and sometimes even seen as a luxury, right? It is sort of a secondary need, but if you really think about it, it's not. And it's a basic need, and that's one of our key messages. Yetunde, back to you to get your impression. You are in Nigeria. You're working with communities, not necessarily in displacement settings, but also with poor communities in general. And in some countries, it is the same, and the situation is the same. Can you tell us a little bit about the situation specifically in Nigeria, and does it resonate with you what Owen and Rafa said in terms of numbers and the situation in the country?
Yes, I totally agree with what Raphael said, and also what he said as well. It's not quite different. I like to say this. I say access to water and food is directly proportional to access to energy, because if you've got electricity to warm food, or to preserve food, or to even boil water, because these people do not necessarily have access to water, pipe-borne water. They have to boil the water from the streams and rivers to be able to drink and to use for household use. So yes, I totally agree with what has been said. However, for the Nigerian setting, I work with very vulnerable communities, and these communities are poor. They live below $1 per day. So you can imagine having to spend out of that money to pay for energy services. So basically, what we do within these communities is to provide solar installations for us electricity, and we also pilot clean cooking solutions. So I'll give an instance of a community of women, basically women doing staple food, the most popular staple food in Nigeria. It's called gari. They are the Isayan women, and basically what they use is firewood to fry the gari, which is made from cassava, right? And they complain a whole lot about having to spend so much on firewood to be able to provide the staple food, which essentially means that you're not exactly making as much money as they should, but they are paying so much, they're putting so much environmental and social costs on themselves, as well as their health costs, right? Because they're exposed to air pollution, they're exposed to, their children cannot even read at night because they are sick from the fumes of the firewood, and it's just this ripple effect on their families and all that. So essentially, I think, or I reckon that if clean cooking solutions are introduced into these communities, might not necessarily be solar. We could start with gas, because gas is a transition fuel for them, employing LPG and engaging them in people-centered transition, not just deploying the solution or a one-size-fits-all approach into these communities, but trying to engage them and to see how they can essentially move on or transition. Because one of the discussions we had with them when we were carrying out the stakeholders engagement is the flavor of the staple food, right? They have this perception, this public perception that the what's called the gari will not maintain the same flavor if another solution technology is being deployed. So obviously there's need to carry out a demonstration to be able to, you know, differentiate, or to be able to ascertain to the fact that it doesn't actually matter which technology you're using. You will still get the same process, except for the efficiencies and all that. So yes, I totally agree with what has been said.
Thank you very much. And I think we all on the call agree that this part you mentioned last, the stakeholder engagement, is a very, very crucial topic. And I think this is also where we can bring in Judith, because you have a lot of experience, because you not only that you provide these cooking solutions as a sort of pioneer to reduce the amount of firewood they use, but you also combine this with quite innovative digital tools that will be available to the people. And do tell us about this, please.
Thank you so much. Yeah, super nice to be a part of this panel, because I think it's such an important discussion. And indeed, I mean, in terms of what we do at ACE is we do combine a hybrid biomass and solar solutions, so people have access to clean cooking with any sort of biomass, which includes processed biomass. And I'd like to come back to that, because I do think it's really important that we discuss that as well. But also solar electricity for charging phones. We mentioned connectivity is super important, and for LED lighting, so that people have their core energy needs all in one sort of compact solution. And that's where we had started from, was that technology. And as we have been working in multiple developing countries, and now also stepping into the displacement setting, it is so crucial that you do engage the end user and engage the local community. And in terms of that, I mean, like, just an example of what we're doing at the moment, we've paired our energy system with a smartphone and a smartphone app called ACE Connect, which allows people to track microfinance loans. We make sure that it's affordable by making them available on microfinance. But what we're doing now in a displacement setting, in fact, in Changwali refugee settlement in Western Uganda, we're looking at how do we use those digital tools and the local community to make sure that that it is all suitable, that it is appropriate, and that it is affordable. So what we implemented was a user referral bonus model, where a successful referral to someone else, so you're bringing in your family members, your neighbors, and whoever else you think is going to be really interested in purchasing this, you get a full monthly payment off, right? So not only are we then really engaging the community in the word of mouth and messaging, and someone likes the product if they're willing to stake their reputation and bring somebody else in on that, and we want to reward them accordingly, and therefore make it more and more affordable in any setting. Now, I realize that this works somewhere like Western Uganda, because people are able to get some income, and there is some funding in these households available that's very different in a crisis setting, or somewhere where people really don't have access to any affordability, no ability to pay, basically. But what we really want to do is, with the digital tools that we're creating, so by linking hardware with software, with data, with linking each other in connectivity and smartphones, it means we can apply it to any setting, right? And we can really understand what the needs are of the local community financially, but also in terms of goods and services. Our ACE Connect app also has a button that says, I'm interested in fuels, so that they can actually register their interest, and we can start to distribute fuels to those households. Now for us, and this is where I'm coming back to the processed fuels, what's very interesting about that is we're now linking the households that are purchasing our energy system to local manufacturers of briquettes. And what we're able to do is generate these local economies, so that you're using the local resources, but that money is staying within the local communities, you're using the local resources. I think there is no one size fits all. One of the things that I'm concerned about is not empowering local communities, not using natural resources that are available for the very best solutions. because we're going to end up disrupting whole communities. And I have to say, it's one thing if, you know, something like liquid paraffin gas is available in the country as a natural resource, to then make sure that it's available to everybody within that country. But it's quite another to switch your entire population over to an imported source of energy. And that is a big concern for me. And I think that's a concern at a much broader level than just a displacement setting. But even then, we're really trying to make sure that that the sort of empowering and the finance is being pumped back into the local communities so that they all rise up together. And by having the data that we have, so for example, I'm very proud to say that in Changwali, we in just a mere 7 or 8 weeks have onboarded nearly 500 households onto our loan program, and they now have the energy systems. That around 50% of those were the result of referrals, which means that they are actively recruiting new households into that program, and that they're now being linked to locally produced fuels through KRC and Care Uganda. The point was lost. The point is lost. The fact that we're able to like connect people within their own community with local fuels, with usage logs. Sorry. So now that we have them connected on ACE Connect, which is the thing that's allowing for all of these things to be implemented, that's the digital technologies that we were talking about, we're also able to see whether products are actually being used, which means that we are actually able to very accurately start to measure the carbon offsets and the savings, the cost savings, the adoption of products. And I think that is also a really, really important element. And this ties in, I think, to points that we'd like to discuss a little bit more, but this sort of private sector partnerships, I think, are so important because we have to think on a very long term and not on a project basis, because we don't operate purely on a project basis. And I think that's where those partnerships and looking at the commercial viability of something like this is very important. The user referral model in a displacement context is viable because we do think that there is the potential to fund and help subsidize through active engagement for households where we know they have even less of an ability to pay, but it's applicable in a commercial context because of customer acquisition costs. So being able to measure that and being able to implement in different contexts based on data, based on needs, based on the local level of engagement can only be done with the kind of technology that we're implementing. So I'm very excited to be working on that, and especially excited that it seems to be going really even better than we thought it would, which was we're sort of now all hands on deck, gung-ho going for it, which is, it's really fun.
Great, thank you. Wow, there was so much in it. Don't know where to start. So I really think this notion of to what extent do we want to be dependent on an imported energy is a very important one. And if you see if you look at the heart of an energy transition, which we see in Europe, for example, part of the reason is to be less dependent on other countries' energy. So I think it is also lessons learned we need to bring more into the cooking topic. However, you brought us nicely from sort of the issues which we discussed at the beginning over technology now to solutions, and especially when we talk, for me, when you talk about solutions, it's not so much about technology as such, it's really about the business model behind a technology. And this is then let's spend the rest of the discussion, next 10 minutes or so, really on business models that we are convinced of. And maybe it's a question to all the speakers. From your experience, where do you see, what is the one business model or the two most critical business model that you are convinced of and that you saw in practice, ideally in our displacement settings, but if it's beyond that, also fine. And let's get started with Yituni.
Okay, so for the business model, I would like to synonymize internally displaced people or communities with very rural and vulnerable communities, because they share some characteristics. For rural communities, very rural communities, I'm talking about communities that have been ravaged by rural-urban migration, that the youths have moved away in search of better opportunities, that they've got scattered households and all that. The right business model is a business model that uses some sort of mixed financing to cater for their capex, the capital expenditure, because they do not have the down payment or the financial ability to pay for that expenditure. So, say for example, we install a solar cooking facility, maybe DC cook stoves or biomass stoves. They don't have the upfront payment to, purchase that, and also because they are financially excluded, so they don't have access to credit, they can't be able to do that. So there is need to help them provide that capital expenditure, and then they can use the finances generated from saving from firewood to cater for their operational expenditure. And in that way, depending on the technology that is being deployed, the technology can be scaled up to, with their own money, not outside funds, because they've obviously saved from you or we having to cater for their capital expenditure, and then it can scale up and even localize that particular solution. So you're talking about capacity building within the youth. They are not migrating, you're staying within the community to impact the community, to repair, to maintain the system. So like I said, it's some sort of mixed financing to enable the capital expenditure. Now, where will this capital expenditure come from? How are we going to mobilize that financing? This is where international communities comes in, to enable this. And I feel like this model is applicable to the internally displaced people across the world, because looking at it, they don't even have the monies to do this. But if you provide that the technology for them and train the youths or the women within the communities, because women are primary energy managers, you train them to be able to repair, maintain the system. They save some money from helping to cater for that, and then it can cater for the operational expenditure and scale up the solution. So I think that would be the right business model for implementing this business.
Can we be a little bit more concrete for people who are not familiar with the cooking sector? How much money are we talking about here? How much is a typical cook stove that we are convinced of, which is more efficient, way more efficient than a freestone fire? Also a question to Yetunde, and then we go back to Judith to address this question.
Okay, so a typical rural vulnerable community earns about, or makes, the revenue is about £60 per month. That's about roughly 20,000. I'm mildly putting it, 20,000 naira per month. That's for Nigeria. And they have to take care of their children from that money. They have to pay for food from that money. So typically you'd expect that they spend about 10% of that funds, of that £60, or that's £6 on cooking and energy needs, so to speak. So imagine, is there any solar cooker that we know right now that is £6? Of course not. Even the DC cook stove doesn't cost that, right? So how do you expect them to survive paying for that? So it's not rocket science. We need to help them mobilize finance to be able to cater for that capital expenditure. But if the operational expenditure is between £4 to £6, they can do it. They can cater for it. And in fact, they will be saving more money because it will take less time to cook food, right? Then women can reappropriate the timing to do other things, maybe weave baskets to sell, or boil or cook the bean cakes to sell, make more products to gain more money, and then they have more money in circulation to take care of their children and their family, because typically these women are breadwinners in these rural landscapes.
Thank you. Judith, do you as a company also provide these loans, or how does it work with your company?
Absolutely. Couple of quick points that I wanted to add, because your question around the pricing, so even at sort of really basic, more improved, because you're already looking at something like 30 to 40 bucks. We sell ours anywhere between 100 and 120 or 30 US dollars, depending on the markets that we're operating in. We're also combining that with smartphones. So you can imagine that's not something that the households that we're talking about here are able to afford in one go. So for us to be able to make these products accessible, we have to provide them on credit, and we have done so since 2015. So we have quite a lot of experience doing that. It's part of the reason why we've developed the technologies that we have, digital technologies, really leveraging things like mobile payments. It's why we think smartphones are such a big game changer here, but also because the additional value it adds to a household. A lot of pay-as-you-go systems are sort of like a clever little box that you have to boop, boop, kind of a number into. But we decided that we wanted to build a customer-facing smartphone app for the data transfer between have you paid or not, to communicate with the hardware, but also because it opens up a whole other world of things, including the sort of efficiency on making sure that we can get those repayments on those loans that we extend. And the loans that we extend vary per market and situation, in length and in monthly amount, based very much on the baseline surveys that we do on every household on their household expenses. And because it's a hybrid product that we sell, because it has the electricity plus the thermal energy, it means that we get affordability also by displacing things like mobile phone charging, candles, kerosene, things that are very inefficient and expensive forms of energy to acquire. We're replacing by essentially one small monthly payment on this bill, and then you get free solar electricity. And depending on what fuel you use, it can be free if you have an abundance of available biomass, things like cow dung, corn cobs, even sort of agricultural waste. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I kind of wanted to tie in, though, is something that Owen said earlier in terms of all the cost we don't take into consideration. If we only look at this household's ability to spend and the decisions they're making on how to spend that, we're not taking the cost of this into account in the slightest. Often when we look at the carbon footprints of households in the regions that we're talking about and in displacement settings, the calculations outside of the work that, Owen, you've done yourself, it's largely based on fossil fuels, meaning we like to say things like, oh, and there's no carbon footprint, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the case. A charcoal using house in somewhere like Uganda or Kenya can have upwards of 10 tons of carbon 10 tons of carbon per year in their energy use alone. And we think that we could offset that by having a severe reduction in the amount of biomass being used, but also transitioning away from very unsustainable forms of biomass towards sustainable forms of biomass. So then not only are you offsetting carbon, but you're also reducing deforestation. And again, as I say, pumping funding into local economies of energy resources. So, but that taking the externalities into account as the true cost of inefficient energy access, it isn't just that these households spend an absurd amount of money. It's also the very last trees. It's also all of that carbon. It's also their health. It's also time wasted. It's also lost economic opportunity. There's so many things that don't get taken into account. And part of our issue, I think, here in this panel as well, is convincing others of the absolute vital importance of thermal energy. Unfortunately, I think one of the worst things we've done to ourselves is call it clean cooking, because it sounds so cute, but it isn't. It's the core energy need of half the world's population who do not have sufficient energy access. There aren't enough players, there isn't enough funding being pumped into something that is really a crisis.
Yeah.
But only if you understand how severe this crisis really is.
I think this point on true cost is certainly something where we need more research also in the future, especially around the health costs. I think this is still not really discussed and analyzed yet. So we have 3 more minutes. Owen, what is your best practice business model that you would like to point out?
Yeah, listen, I was going to dodge this question, Thomas. There's a reason why I think that I kind of think of this issue as the highest hanging fruit. So, people often talk about investments and finding the lowest hanging fruit, the kind of least cost, easiest things to do. I think this is the highest cost thing. We need a wholesale step change in how we approach the issue. And as Judith just said, we need more money and more attention. I guess, there's a whole bunch of cool stuff happening. There's been good cooking projects that have taken place in Niger, for example, in the Diffa region. UNHCR partnered with a local Nigerian company to introduce good gas cooking, which built off a gas supply chain that already existed in Niger. Practical Action are doing cool work in Rwanda in the Renewable Energy for Refugees project. But I don't think anything's really reached the kind of scale and penetration that we really need in this subject.
I want to just quickly say something because I know that that's true and I know that that's an issue. I'm sorry, Rafa, because I know that you had a point to make. One thing I really want to highlight is this project that we started implementing about 7 or 8 weeks ago. I have 2 refugee community sales agents and 2 host community sales agents that managed to sell 500 units within that amount of time. And when you're talking about that kind of pace, and I'll tell you what, it's at above 95% repayment rate currently. I can measure the usage to see whether people are actually adopting. For both thermal energy and electrical energy, I can separately measure whether or not people are adopting these systems. When you look at that, you realize how scalable it could be. And this is one very small project with a very modest budget. This is why we're so excited about what we're doing there, because the demand side is explosive. And 4 brand new sales agents from the very, very local region that we are operating in, way out west in Uganda, are managing to put them away faster than we can deliver them to them. Like, this is where I do think there is huge potential, and it is very investable as long as we're making it affordable and accessible. I just want to point out the business models exist. And when all the pieces fall into place, and trust me, with COVID and supply chain and the muddy roads on the way there, we've had enough challenges and bottlenecks. And even then, at this pace, we've already onboarded 500 households into the program who we're not giving them away. They're paying for them. Yeah, wanted to just
Thank you. Yes, good to hear that these models exist, actually. And no question, I mean, we all know that there is this demand. The question is, how do we deliver this and how do we meet this? Rafa, your final point, please.
Yeah, I guess on the business models, it all depends on the context, the end users, and also the phases of the emergency. So for us, our main goal is to look at tying together the food assistance. We support, 100 million people, for example, this past year, and the 15 million school children. That's another cooking issue right there. So if we can put the 2 things together, it's going to be really impactful. Of course, there is a huge difference between end users that are already paying for the fuel and the end users that are not. So going back to what Judith was saying on the externalities, in those cases when end users are not paying for the fuel, they are just cooking on trees on fires, they collect the wood. We can't expect them to actually, particularly our beneficiaries, right? We support them with food. It means that they can't buy food, and the stove to cook it with would be on top of it. And therefore, I think that there is a space for subsidies that are investing on the social capital of a country, that are reducing the cost of health, the cost of lost forests, the cost of emissions and their impact on climate. So helping the poorest of the poor with subsidies is, I think, has a space. And from our side, being what we do so close to the poorest of the poor, that's something we look at. For us, it's super important in terms of business model to nurture solutions that are developed in partnership with the private sector. So we are trying to move away from the procure and distribute, unless it's the first 72 hours, but to deliver solutions through the local retailers and the manufacturers networks that already exist. So for us, it would be a matter of providing vouchers, for example, for people to be able to choose between the different solutions and pick up the ones that make most sense for them. Because also so many times we've been just choosing in their place and making wrong choices. So I think giving the opportunity, empower end users with the possibility to choose is also super important.
Thank you very much. I honestly won't try to summarize this lively discussion. I just hope that it was interesting for the audience. I want to thank you all panelists, Judith, Rafaela, Yetundi, and Owen, to be part of this panel. I also want to thank my colleague Sadiq, who is in the background and supporting all of this, setting all of this up. And also want to thank SE4All for giving us the opportunity to speak about this important topic. And SE4All is also part of the GPA community. Let me share my final slide for those of you in the audience who are interested to learn more. They can reach out. Here we are. I hope you can see this. We have our website, un10energy.com. We have our Twitter handle, EnergyGPA. We have a LinkedIn page. If you are an energy expert interested in this space, do join our LinkedIn group. We already have roughly 500 experts on the group, and we share ideas, we share reports, we share job opportunities. So do join up for that, sign up for this. And otherwise, again, thank you all for joining. Thank you again for listening. And we hope we can, in the future, scale up these activities for the benefit of the planet and the people. Thank you all.
Thank you.